go ahead and get the meeting started. Welcome to the monthly open meeting of TXNORML. I want to just, this is something that we've instituted recently. We're trying to identify people who have been here before, been here a few times, been here every time, and it's your first time, those sorts of things. So first off, would folks just raise their hands if you've been to one of our open meetings before? If anyone's been to an open meeting before, go ahead and raise your hand. I can see some folks that I know have been to open meetings before that aren't raising their hands, but that's okay. Part of the reason I know is because I see some board members that aren't raising their hands. Raise your hand if you're a board member. All right. Look around at who's here. And come up and talk to us after the meeting. We love to do this stuff. TXNORML is an all-volunteer organization. We all do this for the love of the cause. And because, frankly, it's getting a little bit addicting to see the progress that we're making in Texas. Some of us have been in this for quite some time, including years when, frankly, there was no possibility of any change at all, and we're well beyond that. We're past the tipping point, folks. And just lastly, if you would, and if you're not too embarrassed about it, go ahead and raise your hand if this is your first meeting. All right, that's what we love to see. Just think how great it's going to be to come out next month and raise your hand when someone asks if you've been here before. All right. So for those of you who it is your first meeting and don't know that much about NORML, NORML's mission is to move public opinion sufficiently to legalize the responsible use of marijuana by adults. Oh, I forgot the part where I'm supposed to introduce myself after the sound check. My name's Jamie Spencer. I'm legal counsel for TXNORML. I should have also introduced the board members when they raised their hands, but we skipped that part. So they're here as well. Now, actually, we really don't have to move public opinion that much anymore. That is still part of our core philosophy and what we're here to do. The reason I say we don't need to move public opinion that much is that if you support medicinal marijuana, or decriminalization, meaning either lower penalties or no penalties for some amounts of marijuana but others, or, as I suspect most of you here, support complete legalization. Between all of those three groups, we actually now make up the majority of Texans who believe that. And it's good to be on the right side of history and to be involved in this movement, and we appreciate all the new people that are coming out. There's lots of opportunities to be involved. The legislative session will be happening starting almost just about 6 months from now. We're going to have a lobby day. We would love for y'all to show up and come and meet your legislator and tell him or her what you think about the marijuana laws, because this next session we're going to be making some actual progress. And the other part of NORML's mission is to serve as an advocate for consumers to assure that they have access to high-quality marijuana that is safe, convenient, affordable, and legal. So for tonight's meeting, I'm going to go over some of the news for this month, and after I do that, I'm going to introduce our speaker of the month, Kevin Ludlow. He's upstairs. He'll be speaking to us for a few minutes. And then I'm going to do a breakdown of what our upcoming events are. And then we'll take a short break and we'll have the comedy that we've been having over the last more than a year now. And then, of course, the reggae, the fabulous Mau Chaplains will be playing later. So that deserves a big cheer. Okay, so let's get on with the news. Anybody watch Meet the Press?
Yes.
So Bill Clinton was on Meet the Press with David Gregory. And let's not forget, we're talking about Bill 1992, but I didn't inhale Clinton. So that tells you something about the political climate back then, that he knew that there were enough people apparently that had seen him smoking marijuana that he couldn't completely deny it, but he felt like he had to make an excuse for it. But this last Sunday on Meet the Press, he told David Gregory that he was in favor of letting states decide whether or not to legalize marijuana pointing to a lot of evidence showing that medical marijuana can help patients with a wide range of symptoms. I think is exactly what it was. I think there's a lot of evidence to argue for the medical marijuana thing. Now, when someone as politically savvy as Bill Clinton lines up behind an issue, once again, I go back to one of my favorite points when I'm up here, and that is that we have reached that tipping point. I mean, let me ask y'all this. I'm going to say number one and number two, and then I'm going to take a vote. Who thinks that Bill Clinton is either, number one, really, really a lifelong supporter of our movement and is really concerned about legalizing marijuana, or who thinks that Bill Clinton wants to be first man and get his wife elected as president of the United States? Folks, for number one, who thinks number one, and who thinks number two? Right. I have never seen a politician as savvy as Bill Clinton in my lifetime, and I think it's quite likely that I never will again. So this is, again, a symbol of where we are nationally in this movement, that former presidents are coming out to start to support the cause. And of course, Jimmy Carter, for those of y'all who know, supported it when he was president, but that's another thing. All right, little interesting tidbit in the news. I actually didn't know this. I don't suppose there are any Iowans out there, are there? No, I didn't really think so. Iowa State, anybody know what that is? Texas, okay, yeah. There are probably a few Texans out there. The mascot of Iowa State is Cy the Cardinal. It's this silly little cartoon cardinal. And, you know, all colleges and universities have their mascots. And there is a process by which students and organizations at Iowa State can get permission to use the likeness of the mascot on the t-shirts they sell. If you want to sell Longhorn t-shirts, you've got to get the UT system's permission to do it. Same thing here in Iowa State. And there was an Iowa State University chapter of NORML that went through that process. They had a t-shirt that said, on the front it had NORML ISU, and where the O would be was a silly little cartoon picture of the Iowa State Cardinal. And there was no problem with it at all. It went through, there weren't any problems. They got approved for their t-shirt. It had that on the front. On the back it said, "Freedom is normal at ISU." And they sold those t-shirts for, you know, their fundraising and their efforts for the cause. And one day, there was a person, a student, who was wearing the t-shirt, who got his picture taken, and that picture landed on the front of the Des Moines Register, which is the local newspaper. And a legislator saw it and was outraged. And so that legislator got upset and called campus officials and saw to it that the Iowa State NORML organization would no longer have permission to use Cy the Cardinal on their t-shirts. And so we do not know what the end result is going to be, but a few days ago, some lawyers volunteered and an organization volunteered to help them, and those students at the NORML chapter in Iowa State are suing in federal court under First Amendment grounds. And my prediction is they're going to win that, and again, they're going to bring a lot of press to this issue, which is, again, part of what we're here to do. So I was happy to see that. All right. And I believe Cheyenne spoke at the last meeting? Jack spoke at the last meeting? I should remember this. Just a few days before Jack spoke, I don't remember if she covered this, the House, the Federal House of Representatives, had approved an amendment to a bill, a spending bill in the Appropriations Committee. Did we go over this last time? Okay, so y'all know about that, at least the people that raised your hands and said you were here before. And they approved an amendment, and it passed, which would ban the Department of Justice from spending money to fight medical marijuana states. And this month, Rand Paul and Cory Booker, who are pretty much at the opposite end of the political spectrum, got together and added that amendment in the Senate version of the bill. Now, right now, that bill is unfortunately caught up in a Republican versus Democrat fight that really has absolutely nothing to do with that. The Appropriations Committee basically has to pass an omnibus bill about we're going to spend money on this and we're not going to spend money on that. So that was the sort of clever mechanism by which these federal legislators went ahead and got this issue into this bill, because one of the things that Congress has the power to do is to either give money to the administration for certain matters or to not give them money for it. So most folks are aware that while the Obama administration has at least publicly claimed that they are going to leave the medical marijuana states alone, that's not what's been happening. The raids are getting less and less, fewer and fewer, and I'm glad to report on that. But it would be really nice to actually see that completely defunded. And there's a possibility that the Department of Justice will have all of, now that it's passed both the House and probably will pass the Senate, all of that money that they use to go after the states will not be there, and they'll just literally not be able to do it, even though it might still be illegal federally. Well, why is that? Why is it still illegal federally? 30 of the congressmen that passed those bills just a few weeks ago sent a letter to the Health and Human Services Secretary, who's a woman who I can't remember her name right now. Her name's not important. In the letter itself, and I'm quoting, they said, as you know, the feds list cannabis as a Schedule I narcotic, meaning it has no known or accepted medical use, even though more than 20 states in the District of Columbia have legalized medical marijuana. A possible way to end this disconnect is to conduct studies that prove marijuana's medical efficacy. Scientific research clearly documenting these benefits has often been hampered by federal barriers. We talk a lot about this. This comes up a lot at these meetings about marijuana being classified federally as a Schedule I substance. And I'm going to take a slight break from the news here, because even though in my paying job I deal with Schedule I and Schedule II controlled substances, I'm not necessarily an expert on it. So I did some research on that for this meeting to bring you a little bit of information about that. Knowledge is power, and since many of you will be writing letters to, or emailing, or hopefully showing up for our lobby days and going to meet with your legislators, the more information that you have at your fingertips, the better off you're going to be when you hear the types of excuses that we hear from our elected officials about why they are in our corner but can't quite maybe see the way there yet. All right, so the Department of Justice makes the drug schedules, okay? And they are classified into 5 distinct categories or schedules depending upon the drug's accepted medical use and the drug's abuse or dependency potential. Water. And the other issue with the drug schedules is that they've written the law in a way that they say, hey, not only are these very specific chemical compounds, and they list them out what they are in Schedule I or Schedule II or Schedule III or wherever, but anything that is like them. These lists describe the basic or parent chemical and do not necessarily describe the salts, isomers, and salts of isomers, esters, and derivatives, which may also be classified as controlled substances. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what those schedules are and how ridiculous it is, and also what the deleterious effects on research are for us having marijuana scheduled as a Schedule I substance. Schedule I drugs are supposedly, and according to Congress, the most dangerous drugs of all of them, with potentially severe psychological or physical dependence. Now, they include the opioids. The opioids are really things that no one has heard of. I know you think you have, but I'm going to get to that in a little bit. The opioids are this weird batch of multisyllabic chemical compounds that are among the most dangerous. Now, the second part of Schedule I is the type of opiate derivatives, or what they're called, that you have heard of. Those are the heroines and the other types of morphines and nicotines and those sorts of things. Okay? And then there are depressants. Not all of them, of course, right? Because alcohol is a central nervous system depressant. That's not illegal. No, the depressants that are in Schedule I are things like Quaaludes, which is more of a 70s thing than a 2000 type thing. And then you have pretty much all of the hallucinogenic or psychedelic substances. You have mescaline, peyote, LSD, methylene deoxymethamphetamine. Anybody know what that is? Methylene deoxymethamphetamine, MDMA. Anybody know what that is?
Oh yeah.
There we go, ecstasy. Okay. And of course, what we're all here about, marijuana. This is in Schedule I. Now, below that is Schedule II. Schedule II drug substances or chemicals are defined as drugs with a high potential for abuse, less abuse potential than Schedule I drugs, with use potentially leading to severe psychological or physical dependence. So wait a minute, Jamie, didn't you just say that about Schedule I? No, they changed the wording just a little bit. Schedule I is potentially severe psychological or physical dependence. Schedule II is potentially leading to severe psychological or physical dependence. And I hear some of y'all thinking, but goodness gracious, there doesn't seem to be much of a difference between those two. How could this happen? Well, let's not forget, we currently have a federal Congress that the majority of them, or I think it's pretty close to a majority of them, when they're asked about climate change, they all raise their hands and say, oh, I'm not a scientist. There's no way for me to know anything about climate change, right? I'm not a scientist. Well, these are the geniuses that have decided that they can substitute themselves for medical doctors and real scientists in terms of determining what drugs are bad for you, right? These are the people that are saying, hey, I'm not a scientist. So Schedule II includes codeine and morphine, cocaine, clearly less dangerous than marijuana, methamphetamine, methadone, and drugs like Dilaudid, Demerol, Oxycontin, Adderall, and Ritalin, which we're now giving to our children. Schedule III drugs are defined as those where the drug abuse potential is less than Schedule I and Schedule II, but more than Schedule IV. So that's not really telling you much, is it? They just sort of have this list. Those are going to be things like combination products with less than 15 milligrams of hydrocodone per dosage unit, that's Vicodin, Tylenol with codeine and those sorts of things. And then you have your Schedule V drugs, Xanax, Soma, Darvocet, Valium, Ativan, Ambien, and those sorts of things. So part of the issue here is that there's a chicken or the egg quality to putting marijuana into Schedule I in the first place, because since it has, according to those scientific congressmen, no valid scientific use, you're not even really allowed to study what those medical uses might be in the first place. However, part of the reason that I put all of that into the news section is that about 10 days ago, press secretary for the Food and Drug Administration put out a press release saying, and this is sort of exciting, that the FDA is reviewing the medical evidence surrounding the safety and effectiveness of marijuana. And that is a process which could lead to the agency downgrading the drug's current status as a Schedule I drug. And so the last time that this happened seriously was in 1995. Politically speaking, unfortunately, whatever recommendations come out from this new FDA study that they're going to do still has to go back to the DEA. And the DEA gets its fingers on it. And what the DEA has always done is ignored any kind of progress that the FDA has done in terms of trying to make sense of some of our marijuana laws, at least in terms of declassification. But it is definitely a good sign that the FDA is looking into this again. And they look at 8 different factors, or they claim they look at 8 different factors when they're talking about whether or not they should reschedule or potentially completely declassify marijuana. One is its actual or relative potential for abuse. Anybody here want to shout out what you think the actual or relative potential for abuse for marijuana probably is? Anybody? No takers? I heard a 10%. What else did I hear over here? Did I hear 6%? The question is, it has been studied. I'm asking folks what they think the actual or relative potential for abuse is of marijuana. And I heard 0. I was expecting a 0. It would be nice if it were 0. It's not 0, and again, knowledge is power. There's something called the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders and Diseases, and they do some really long-term, longitudinal studies on various addictive substances as well as other things. It turns out that there probably is about a 1.5% chance of actual or potential for abuse with marijuana. That can be sort of a vague term. But what we're talking about is folks who have real difficulties controlling their use of marijuana or even experiencing withdrawal symptoms. So the first factor they're looking at is how bad is it? And this factor actually comes up again and again when they're looking at whether or not to declassify a drug. But 1.5% though is extremely low. Ethyl alcohol. Alcohol, that's the molecule that's in the beer and drinks that we drink when we drink alcohol. There are about 2/3 of Americans that consume alcohol, and about 10% of alcohol drinkers consume 50% of the alcohol that's drunk in America throughout any given year. Think about that. 10% of folks that drink alcohol are drinking half of all the alcohol that's being consumed. The potential for abuse is actually probably 10 to 15%, or maybe even a little bit higher with alcohol, and of course that's a completely legal drug. The other types of things that they look at are the scientific evidence of its pharmacological effect, the state of current scientific knowledge about the drug or substance, and here we come back to that chicken or the egg thing that I'm talking about. It's a good thing that there are many other countries where we're getting these actual studies of the beneficial effects of marijuana. Its history and current pattern of abuse. By the way, when I'm talking about all these factors, these are the enumerated factors that the FDA actually looks at. Now, one of the arguments that you'll hear from people, not necessarily so much in Austin, not necessarily so much from people that you hang out with, because we all tend to hang out with like-minded people, is that somehow, and I'm going to make an argument that this is a myth, somehow alcohol is a part of our culture in a way that marijuana is not, and that somehow that justifies the criminalization of marijuana in a way that criminalization of alcohol is unjustified. Alcohol is the #1 drug used in the United States. Anybody want to guess? It's not marijuana. What's number 2?
Caffeine.
Oh, caffeine. If they knew how much coffee I drank, caffeine would be number 2, but it's actually tobacco. Marijuana is the 3rd most popular drug in the United States. We're a population of about 313 million people right now, and about 100 million Americans have used marijuana at some point. 25 million have used in the past year, and about 14 million are regular users. So actually, we do have a culture of marijuana use. Not as much as alcohol, and not as devastating, not with the devastating effects that our overuse of alcohol has had. But basically, you are not alone out there. So if the FDA were actually to take a look at that factor fairly, that would weigh in favor of declassification. And then they go through a bunch of other factors that are all just ways of saying, how bad is it? I'm not going to bore you with the specific ones, but they keep on asking themselves if there's all of these harmful effects. And then the last one, the 8th one, is whether or not the substance is an immediate precursor of a substance that's already controlled under the subchapter of the Controlled Substances Act in the first place. Technically, that probably weighs against marijuana because I've talked about it before. Hash, of course, is even worse than marijuana in our criminal laws, both in the state of Texas and federally. And I think technically marijuana is probably a precursor of hash. So at any rate, the bottom line is that when you know the facts about why it is that, number one, it became a Schedule I controlled substance in the first place, and whether or not it should be declassified, regulated, sold, and taxed legally, hopefully that will help you in your discussions with either other people or the people in charge who are making these decisions. All right. So, of course, there's been a lot of talk about Colorado ever since they passed their wonderful law, which is what all of us are trying to get passed here. Some of you may remember that Oregon had something very similar at the time, and it was sort of surprising that Oregon's did not pass. Well, just this past month, an organization in Oregon needed 100,000 signatures to put that back on the ballot, and they actually got almost 150,000 signatures. They are still in the process of legitimizing the signatures, but the general rule is going to be if you get about 5 to 10% more of the signatures that you need, you're guaranteed that, whoever wrote down that they were wrong, McDonald, those sorts of goofy jokers, those will be weeded out, but they'll have way more than 100,000 necessary. So Oregon this November, we now know, will be voting on the Control, Regulate, and Taxation of Marijuana and Industrial Hemp Act. And it is very similar to Colorado's law. Adults 21 and up would be able to purchase cannabis at retail stores as well as grow their own at home, so long as there aren't more than 4 pot plants growing at a time and no more than 8 ounces of herb on site. 8 ounces. Anybody need more than 8 ounces at home? But wait. Home growers would also be able to keep up to 16 ounces of infused products like edibles, oils, and butter. And again, there's a lot of themes when you come to these meetings again and again that you hear. Most folks know about the Jacob Lavoro case up in Round Rock. That's the Round Rock Browning case. Everybody heard of that? The reason that he is in as much trouble as he is because of our laws about adulterants and dilutants. And in terms of the Oregon legislation, I think this is extremely forward-thinking of them. We're still working on baby steps in Texas, but I wanted to point out that they had the foresight to say that if you're going to put it in edibles or oils or butter or something like that, you can actually still possess a greater quantity than you would if it were just the drug itself, which then counteracts these silly laws about adulterants and dilutants. So that has a substantial chance of passing, and it's something to think about as we dream of not only really realizing small victories very soon, but the greater victories that will be in our future as well. All right. Now, there are currently 13,000 medical marijuana patients in Hawaii. These are people that have medical marijuana cards. However, there is no provision in Hawaii's law that allows them to buy it anywhere. Some of y'all have heard of the miracle ounce. That started from a San Francisco politician, and then that phrase went to some other places. It's not unusual when I'm talking about these baby steps to allow possession but not sale. The miracle ounce means, for example, a place that would allow you to possess an ounce in your home, but you couldn't have it in public, you couldn't buy it, you couldn't sell it, you couldn't grow it at home, but it was perfectly lawful to possess it at home. So it was the miracle ounce. How did you get it? Well, Hawaii is finally rectifying that situation. The Hawaii House Health Committee has formed a medical marijuana dispensaries task force. And it's going to make recommendations, and it's already very clear where this is headed. The State House Health Committee wouldn't form a medical marijuana dispensaries task force if they weren't planning on the first steps towards allowing medical dispensaries in Hawaii. So that's good news for Hawaii. I also wanted to throw in one of Cheyenne's favorite themes, which is to have just a little bit of a chat about imperfect bills. We try not to kid folks at Texas NORML about what we're actually going to achieve. There is, of course, no real chance at this next legislative session that we're going to go just complete full legalization of everything. But you can look at Hawaii, for example, and say, even though they sort of passed a law that didn't make complete sense, at least they started with that, and that laid the foundation for future laws that would allow not only the possession, but the ability to sell and buy marijuana. So that's something to think about. Trying to keep an eye on the time, guys. Okay. All right. I tell you what. I think what I should do, given the time at this point, is I'll get back to the news depending on how much of this next section takes. But I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker for the night. His name is Kevin Ludlow. He's going to come up here and talk for a few minutes. He is a candidate for the Texas House of Representatives District 46. I am going to quote you something from his website. I went and looked on it, and of course, you know, a candidate has positions on many, many issues, but you'll be happy to know that if you go to Kevin's website, the very first issue that you'll see is about the war on drugs, and then there are other issues, of course, that he's interested in as well. And his statement on his website was that as a Texas state representative, I would fight vehemently to end the so-called war on drugs in Texas. At an absolute minimum, Texas must follow suit with Colorado and Washington and allow the recreational use of marijuana. Going beyond this, Texas should lead the charge in abolishing the criminalization of personal drug consumption across the board. And so that's exactly the kind of guy that we think should come and speak to us for a few minutes at our meeting. And I would like to introduce candidate for Texas House of Representatives District 46, Kevin Ludlow.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Jamie, for that wonderful introduction, and that was directly off of my website, so thanks for that. I wanted to thank Jack Finkel. I don't know exactly where she is. Those lights are bright. Back. Thanks very much. We got to meet a couple of months ago, and she asked me if I wanted to do this, and so naturally I was very honored to come out here. Thanks to NORML for having me. As Jamie said, I'm running for the Texas State House of Representatives, District 46. That's in East Austin. If you're not familiar with the district numbers, it's north of 7th Street, east of 35, up into Pflugerville, and east out into Manor. So it's a pretty big area. There's 166,000 people, 118,000 of whom can vote. Of that, we've got about 68% minorities. So it's a fairly large minority area, which is significant, of course, to the situation with the war on drugs. I want to give you a little bit of background about me. I was born in the Northeast. I'm 35 years old, so I was born in the late 70s, just got in there. And my family moved to Texas when I was 8 years old. I've been here ever since. I grew up in West Houston. And that's kind of where my story with marijuana starts. So I want to tell a quick anecdotal story that I've never actually told anybody before, other than a few of my friends. I thought a political campaign was the place to do it. When I was 16 years old, in addition to being in sports very heavily in school, I was also in computer clubs and all that sort of thing. I was a super nerd in high school, and incidentally not very popular. But I was pretty good at fixing things. And one day this guy, his name is JR, he had this beautiful car, and he asked me if I could help him fix a stereo inside his vehicle. So I said, sure, bring your car over to my house and we'll do it. He's a year older than me. So he comes over, I fix it, we were all good to go. He was very happy, he wanted to give me some money for it. I said, no, I don't need anything. And he said, well, I want to give you something for it. He's like, have you ever smoked marijuana before? And I had not. So I had just started drinking earlier that year. This was all very brand new to me. Previous to that, I had been involved in all sorts of religion, and of course, as you probably know, marijuana is the devil's lungs. So we stay away from that sort of thing. So anyways, I said, sure, let's try it out. So the next day at school, he actually brings me a joint. Now, if you think about what that means in today's day and age, I mean, I would have been, walked out in cuffs, that whole sort of thing. But I was completely naive to that, and so I walked out of my high school just holding up this marijuana cigarette. A couple days later, I went out to a party, and for the very first time in my life, it was in February, whenever I was 16 years old, and I got to smoke this marijuana cigarette. And for the first time ever, it occurred to me that really nothing happened. In fact, I really enjoyed it a lot more than the alcohol I've been drinking. I didn't have any hangover the next day, and it was horrible, which was pretty nice. So there's all sorts of benefits that I saw to it, and for the very first time, I had to start questioning, is this really the devil's drug, or is this just something else that people enjoy? It's 19 years later, and I still enjoy it. So that was the beginning of it. Since that time period, I went off to college. I got a degree in mathematics from the University of Texas. I did my undergraduate in number theory research. I own a software company. I published a book last year. I run a weekly podcast. And now I'm running a political campaign. So the fact of the matter is that you can smoke marijuana and still do some things with your life. So the campaign kind of came out of nowhere last December, and we used Reddit. I don't know how many people in here are Redditors, but somewhere over here. So Reddit has been instrumental in getting people together. It really has. And not only has it brought money to the campaign, but more importantly, it's brought volunteers. So in this corner, if you get a chance, this is a small team of mine over here, and they have been working just around the clock to help me with this campaign. So I'm incredibly grateful to them. As Jax mentioned to me today, she was driving around and she noticed one of the things that the campaign has recently gotten, we have a huge billboard up on I-35. It's just north of 290. It's got about a 200 square foot mug of me. And in addition to that, it's got some text on it. There's three things that I'm focusing on in this campaign. I'm focusing on civil liberties, I'm focusing on the LGBT issue, and I'm also focusing on drug policy. It's very, very important to me. So to that extent, I want to start talking about the drug policy. I know there's really three different levels, as far as I can tell, as far as what people are interested in doing with respect to drugs. Some people are interested in just pushing for medical marijuana reform in the state, and I think that's all fine and good. Some people are pushing for full recreational use, similar to what Colorado eventually got, and some people are pushing for the full legalization of drugs across the spectrum. I just want to let you know my personal views before we get going any further. I believe, just like Jamie's introduction said about me, that all drugs should be legal, and I really, really believe that sincerely. I'd like to see the scheduling program completely dismantled. I think the DEA should not exist. They're definitely not. I'd like to see the DEA should not exist, and I'd like to see all of these rights transferred into the states. The states should be the ones to determine whether or not we have drug policies and laws. So, whether or not you agree with one of those points or a second point or all three of them or wherever you stand on the spectrum, the most important thing that I want to bring to you guys is that my utmost belief in this campaign is to get the message out that regardless of where you are, people should not be in cages for using drugs, ever. It's outrageous, it's dehumanizing, it's oppressive, and it's expensive, I might add. And we're the ones fronting the bill for this, so it's absolutely absurd. So day one in office would be to work with any Democrats, any Republicans that are interested. I am running as a Libertarian candidate, by the way. And to work with anybody across the spectrum who would be interested in the decriminalization of drugs across the board. So there's that. It's come up already with Jamie here, but I wanted to talk for a second with Jacob Lavoro. I think he's upstairs. I had the pleasure of meeting Jacob about 2 months ago, a month ago, whenever this whole thing happened. He came out to one of our meetings. And anyways, I got to talk with him a little bit. I don't know everything about him. I can't speak to all of his, whether he's a morally great person or not, but I know that he's a really nice kid, and he has no sort of criminal history whatsoever. And those two things combined tell me that there's no way somebody should be facing 5 to 99 in prison just because they baked brownies for friends and what have you. So going back to my original thing, nobody should be in cages for this sort of thing. It's absolutely preposterous. And the fact that they gave him a plea deal, mind you, which dropped it from 2 to 20, and thankfully I think the lawyer turned it down last I heard. I mean, it's just absurd. Like I mentioned, I am running as a Libertarian candidate, so with that comes the notion of free markets. However, there are a few things that I very strongly believe really shouldn't be left to the free market, and one of those that I want to talk about very briefly is private prisons. I do not believe in private prisons, and I do not believe that the private system is going to handle this. The problem is really simple. When you create an incentive-based structure for anything, that thing tends to grow. And right now, that's what we've been seeing. You've got an entire system that's predicated upon making money. And in order to make money, they need people to be locked up. And in order to be locked up, they need to lock in to make sure there's more and more laws on the books. And that's what we've been seeing for years and years. This has to end. And I might add, there are a couple of states right now that are making efforts to do away with private prisons. So I don't really know if it's going to happen. I know that if I were in the state house, I would definitely be trying to lead an effort to end this as well. Because, like I said, it contributes to the first problem that I have. People shouldn't be in cages for drugs. On to the legalization of marijuana. Obviously, I believe, probably like all of you do, that at an absolute minimum, we need to have medical marijuana inside of the state of Texas. It has to exist. It's absolutely absurd that there is a drug that exists that can help people, that can make people feel better, cancer patients, anything else. We all know all the details on this. You guys know way better than I do. The fact that inside of Texas this is illegal still, it just blows my mind every single day. So I think that's the very first thing that we need to shoot for. Beyond that, I really do believe that we need to adopt a policy similar to Colorado's. I think it's a reasonably good policy. There's certainly flaws to it that I'm not in favor of, but at the same time, it's a step in the right direction. Now, to that point, I just want to take a moment to kind of consider the whole libertarian anarchist type of position, because I really do believe strongly in these sorts of things. And I want to make sure that people think about this. I looked at the law, and if I'm not mistaken, somebody can perhaps correct me, but I believe that the law says in Colorado that you can have up to 6 plants and 3 can be budding at any one particular time. Is that more or less it? So I liken that to any number of similar states. Imagine if you had some old woman out in her garden with her giant hat on and pruning shears and what have you. She's got that 4th tulip bulb that goes into the ground. Imagine if that sort of thing were illegal, you can have 3 of one particular plant, but the second you get to the 4th one, now somehow you've stepped over some sort of a line where you should be incarcerated for that. It just doesn't make any sense. And so the reality is that here we are celebrating what Colorado's done, and I really do celebrate it. I believe it's a step in the right direction. But we have so far to go still, because we're celebrating the notion that we're putting a limit on how many plants somebody can grow. And I mean, I just think that's absolutely ridiculous. So something to consider moving forward. Another thing that I want to talk about very briefly, because again, Colorado really did blow me away with this particular one, but they implemented the retroactive reversal of marijuana convictions. And to be perfectly honest with you, I actually think that that was quite more of a statement for the state to make than for them to legalize marijuana in the first place. The reason being, because there was all sorts of money being made, the private prison system up there as well. So this is something that really, really impressed me with Colorado after the fact. And as a state rep, I absolutely am in favor of the retroactive reversal of marijuana inside the state. Ideally, and as Jamie was saying, I'd like to see that for all non-violent drug offenders across the board. But again, this is a normal meeting, so let's stick to marijuana. So, as a very brief summary, because I don't want to keep this long for you guys, I support the legalization of drugs across the board. I just want to make that very well known as a candidate for the Texas State House of Representatives. There does exist at least one person who favors that. I want to introduce legislation to legalize marijuana and to at least decriminalize certain quantities of all other drugs. I strongly oppose the private prison system and want to have them shut down, at least in the state of Texas. And I want to immediately see all nonviolent drug offenders removed from incarceration. The war on drugs is an abysmal failure, and my understanding of this is because drugs were never really the enemy in the first place. It's just a preposterous notion. The fact that we've lived with this for 30 or 40 years, whatever it is right now, is just absolutely beyond absurd to me. As a politician, or somebody at least an aspiring politician, I'd certainly like to help do whatever I can to reverse that trend. Unfortunately, there are bunches of politicians spitting out other bullshit on the topic all of the time, and you all know this. So there's at least one who's trying to reverse that trend, and I need your help getting into the office. I'm absolutely willing to make whatever steps we can towards fixing this problem, towards addressing the problem, but it does take help, it takes support. I don't necessarily need money. What I need are people who are willing to volunteer, who are willing to put my name out there, who are willing to get out on the streets. Like I said, the small team that I have over here, we have a much larger team, about 4 or 5 of them are here. We've got about 20 people that have been regularly helping me out, and it's unbelievable to see that sort of support for something so grassroots. So anyways, if you are interested, if you would like to help us with any sort of canvassing or anything of that nature, please go talk to Tara Van Zyl. She's up in the corner. She would be happy to take your name, and we'd certainly be happy to have you work with us. Thanks again. I wanted to thank Jax again for getting me out here, Jamie for introducing me, and for NORML for having me. I'm Kevin Ludlow. I'm running for the Texas State House of Representatives, District 46. Come out and vote November 4th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. All right. So, some Texas news and some local news, in fact. Just a few tidbits and then the events. The City Council of Austin, who knows where I'm going with this? Let's hear about this. This has been sort of a dream of mine, and then I did absolutely nothing that actually made it happen, and then it happened anyway. So I guess that's why they call it a dream. The City Council of Austin, Texas has voted to approve a resolution in favor of legalizing medical cannabis. And the vote was unanimous. Now, it doesn't actually legalize anything. We've talked about this before. You can't have local rules where they change the laws locally, and I'm not going to bore you with the intricacies of that right now. But it's a proposal that's planned to be discussed in the 2015 legislative session. Austin has lobbyists that go to the legislature and say, hey, we're the city of Austin, we want this and we want that. And one of those these and that's this time is going to be, and here's the full text of the approved resolution. They approved the resolution amending the city's state legislative agenda to include support for legislation that would create an affirmative defense to prosecution for patients who are being treated by a licensed physician and who use medical marijuana, or legislation to legalize the use of medical marijuana. So essentially this is an endorsement of Elliot Neistat's bill that we talk about that will also be being reintroduced in the 2015 legislative session in the House, and we are hopeful that we will get companion legislation like that in the Senate. So anyway, hooray for Austin. A little bit of something that I labeled as crazy news. Y'all have heard me talk before about, before getting really involved in TXNORML, I've been a lifetime member of the National NORML Legal Committee, and that's really meant nothing in Texas for the first many, I started practicing in 1997, and just nothing was happening. But I belong to the listserv, the email of people, lawyers talking to each other in these medical marijuana states, and they would do crazy things like email each other, hey, I won my client's marijuana case. Does anybody have a motion that I can file to get my client's pot back? Which of course was crazy to me because I never went into court and said it was my client's pot in the first place, and there's these lucky lawyers that get to go get their client's pot back. Well, in that same sort of crazy vein, there's a group of medical marijuana patients on the Big Island of Hawaii, and they are suing to get back pot plants that were allegedly seized wrongfully by police under their medical marijuana laws. A total of 52 plants was taken in a June 2012 raid, and the plaintiffs want compensation of $260,000 or $5,000 for each plant. The sad thing is there's something called sovereign immunity, which is this thing the government made up that says because we're the government, you kind of can't sue us unless we let you sue us. It gets more complicated than that. I have no idea how they're actually going to get around that, but I just thought that was an interesting news tidbit. And then for the final bits of news before we get to the events, I want to talk about another thing, another supposed roadblock that we hear all the time when we are trying to change the drug laws. I call it, what about the children, right? If you legalize marijuana, the children are all going to go to hell in a handbasket immediately. They're all going to be shooting heroin under the bridge. And exactly, that's one thing. Well, so in Colorado, there is now something called the Marijuana Enforcement Division. Now, these aren't necessarily the good guys. Think you're talking about alcohol. The analogy here is to TABC. Okay? I don't know if y'all know this, but in my paying day job, I get to represent young folks that have been set up by TABC, Texas Alcohol Beverage Commission. They get people that look 23 or 25 years old, but that are actually 19, and they send them into the bar, and they see whether or not they can get the bartender to sell them alcohol, or they send them into the 7-Eleven, and they see if they can get the busy clerk to sell them alcohol, and then they get charged with a Class A misdemeanor up to a year in jail and up to a $4,000 fine for accidentally selling alcohol to a minor. It's no longer required that you have to intentionally sell alcohol to a minor. Okay, so that's kind of crazy. So TABC does that in Texas. Well, the Marijuana Enforcement Division in Colorado set up a sting operation, and with the help of the Denver Police Department, they targeted 16 different dispensaries. And then after they did that, they wrote a report and they published it in the last week or so. And it turns out that not one single gram of marijuana has been illegally sold over the counter of a retail or medical marijuana center in Colorado to minors. And they have, their equivalent of TABC has hundreds and hundreds of alcohol violations every year. In other words, it's easier for teens to get alcohol in Colorado than it is marijuana. That's in part because there's enormous fines. The fines for the individual businesses for alcohol are something like $3,000 apparently. The fine is up to $100,000 in Colorado for selling to a minor. So the dispensaries are doing a great job, and it's important that you know that, because when you hear about what about the children argument, you can let folks know, listen, they're actually doing a better job of regulating marijuana than they are of regulating alcohol. And finally, I'd like to just point out today is July 2nd, first Wednesday of every month, Flamingo Cantina. Thank you, Angela, for allowing us to be here for several years now. We always love coming to Flamingo Cantina. Yesterday was July 1st, so that marks the 6-month anniversary of the great social experiment in Colorado. It started on January 1st. The legalization and regulation of marijuana for all adults age 21 and over. Now, the news coverage of that has been pretty spotty. They did a story here about, all the Colorado marijuana is coming down, and now veterinarians are worried that dogs are getting their hands on marijuana that's flooding in from Texas to Colorado, because the news organizations like to make a big deal out of things that are silly sometimes. However, I want to give you 5 facts that we know about the first 6 months of social and economic developments from the 6-month-old retail cannabis market. There's been a 5.2 decrease in violent crime in the city of Denver. I already told you, no stores found selling to minors. $69 million in retail marijuana pot sales. 10,000 people working in the marijuana industry in Colorado. 10,000 jobs. That's not going to solve all of our unemployment problems, but wouldn't you like to have a job where you really believe in what you do? It's coming to Texas. And $10.8 million in tax revenue, not including the licensing fees, which are these outrageous fees that the dispensaries have to pay. And none of that includes the cost savings of not arresting and incarcerating folks. So basically the first 6 months of Colorado has been an unmitigated success when you look at the facts, and it's important that we have the facts when we go to convince our Texas legislators that it's the right thing for us to do here as well. Okay, I'm going to skip to our events. We've got some upcoming events. They're in July 12th. If you know anybody in Beaumont, tell them about the Health Start NORML in Southeast Texas. It's going to be, all right, is it Beaumontians? Is that how I say it? Yeah. Some Beaumontians. So it's going to be at 4 o'clock at a place called the Art Studio. Now, here's the amazing thing. Facebook shows that 484 people are going. I have a hard time believing that. But okay, it's going to be popular in Beaumont. A few days later, July 16th of this month, we're going to have our local Texas NORML July strategy meeting. That's going to be at Cheddar's Casual Cafe at 6:30. And then a few days after that, something that I'm super excited about, something that all of us here at Texas NORML are excited about. It's going to be our Texas NORML Veterans Conference. It's going to be at the Carver branch of the Austin Public Library. It's going to start at 10:30. And Dave Bass said that he wanted to say, Dave is right behind me. Let me introduce our Veterans Liaison, Dave Bass. He's going to tell you about the Texas NORML Veterans Conference on July 19th.
Thank you, James. Please raise your hand if you fit one of the following 3 categories. You're a veteran. You have a family member who's a veteran. Or you have a friend who's a veteran. How many? Like almost everybody. One of the biggest issues in America right now, if you read the news, is veterans who are using cannabis for PTSD and chronic pain. 22 states have legal medical marijuana programs. Of those, 12 states, 11 or 12, allow PTSD as a qualifying condition. But in Texas, that doesn't apply. In Texas, a veteran who's using cannabis for PTSD or chronic pain can go to prison. They can lose their treatment at VA clinics, and that is not right. And so on July 19th at Carver Library, right over here across the highway, we're going to have the first annual Texas NORML Veterans Conference, and we're going to have some fantastic speakers, including Tristan, the Deputy Director of DFW NORML, and William Martin, who wrote the article War Without End in this issue, the June issue of Texas Monthly about veterans in Texas using cannabis. And we would like to invite you to come out. Scott LaLocke, he designed this beautiful flyer, and we have them over there on the table. Be sure and pick one up. And if you are a veteran or friends with a veteran or have veterans in your family, come out and join us for this. We will be serving a free lunch, courtesy of Texas NORML, to all the attendees. We currently have 101 RSVPs, so it's going to be a really good event, and we hope you'll come out. The after party is going to be right here at the Flamingo Cantina that Saturday night. So we will take care of business on Saturday, and Saturday night we'll come over here and party. Vincent will be speaking. Cheyenne will be speaking. So please come out. It's going to be fantastic. Tomorrow on Fox 7, during the 5 o'clock news and the 9 o'clock news, they will have a segment on veterans who are using cannabis for PTSD in Texas, and I was interviewed for that, and so was William Martin. If you missed the news, you can they'll archive it and you can see it on their site. So there's a lot of things happening with veterans, and we are determined to legalize marijuana in Texas so that veterans have legal access to marijuana in our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Big Bass. And finally, our next first Wednesday of the month is going to be August 6th, right back here for our Texas NORML monthly open meeting, and Cheyenne will be the MC. And I invite y'all to come out. It's going to be a little different. We're going to have some interactivity. Folks talk all the time about what can I do to help. Well, a lot of that meeting is going to be about that. But before we get to Dreadneck Wednesday and the Mau Mau Chaplains, we're going to do smoke and stand up right now and have our comedians come out. And I would like to introduce one of my favorite comics. And actually, yes, I do go out and see stand-up comedy. I don't just do this on the first Wednesday of every month. Here is the MC for the comedy of the night, the Outlaw Montgomery Wayne. Please give a big round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Hey, NORML. How you doing? Hey, man, you got to go to Carver Public Library on July 19th to support the veterans. I was down there and saw Kinky Friedman speak, and he didn't win his election because we weren't getting together. So now I need you to vote for Kevin Ludlow, living on the east side from 7th to Pflugerville. What do you need, Kevin? 50 votes? 200 votes? We got him right here, right? We got it. So y'all can make it happen right now, man. I'm moving.
One bright morning when my work is over, I'll fly away home. Lord, one bright morning when my work is over,